Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Iconicon. This is my third panel here, and I hope you all have been enjoying the show. A little bit unique here today. We're not going to be doing anything near as heavy as we did yesterday, obviously, dealing with child safety, and this is not prepared content like the history of Thundercats. What we've got today is something very unique. We are going to be going over the contributions of Leonard Starr through the 80s. We're going to primarily be touching on three major things that he worked on, although we will, of course, delineate into other things as well as the conversation goes. We're going to primarily be talking about Orphan Annie, Thundercats, and, of course, because he worked on it as well, Silverhawks. My guest here is James Gautier. He is a personal friend of Leonard Starr and knew him for apparently quite some time before he wound up passing. Why don't you go ahead and tell the folks here that are on the stream about how you met Mr. Starr?
Oh, sure. Well, I first heard about Leonard Starr when I started to read the comic strip Annie in the newspapers back in 1980. And, I fell in love with the stories and the artwork. I thought they were amazing. And one point in 1983, a friend of mine who was a comic book artist by the name of Salter Pani said, "Why don't we go to this comic convention in New York City? I hear Leonard Starr will be at it, and you're a fan of his." And I'm like, okay, sure, that sounds great. So we went there, and Leonard was there with Stan Drake, his partner in a lot of projects, and they were promoting the graphic novel they had come out with called Kelly Green. And so I purchased three of the books of Kelly Green, the first three issues, and also got a chance to talk with him. Found out that he was a Connecticut resident like me. He lived in a town just a few towns away from me, and we got talking about different things. I have a way of chatting with people, and the subject of old time radio came up, and he had commented that he loved the old radio show Sam Spade, and he wished he could hear it again. And I said, well, I can get you some episodes of that. Give me your contact information, and I'll get you some. And so he did, and I kept in contact with him. He invited me down from time to time to his studio in downtown Westport. I got to see him working there on the comic strip Annie, and it was also in that studio on one of my visits when I went there, where he was telling me about the new TV series he was working on called Thundercats, and he told me a little bit about it. And he said, I also have a cassette here of the theme song for it. Would you like to hear it? And I said, sure. So he put the cassette in the player and he puts it on, and I hear for the first time the song that everybody knows. And after it was over, he said, so what do you think? And I still remember to this day, I said, I don't know what this show is about, but just based on that theme song, this thing is going to be a hit. I said, that is the best theme song I have heard in a long time. So he liked that. And so I, since he was busy with a lot of things, when the show actually did premiere on TV, I recorded it on VHS for him so that he could watch it at his leisure. And I gave him all the tapes. I recorded all the episodes, and he was really very busy on the show. And our relationship grew, and we became friends. And I would visit him at his house. Many times he was even a guest at our wedding, and for many years we would visit and go out to dinner or to the movies. And I knew him for over 30 years until his passing, which I still miss him after all these years. He was a great guy.
Really seems like it. I've spoken to other people who there's this younger person. I say younger person, probably closer to my age, who apparently had done some work for him at one point, and she was a fan of the cartoon, and he gave her one of the copies of the Story Bible, and she still proudly owns that. So I'm pretty aware that he's a very giving, very kind man, but he also did not seem like the type of man who put up with any sort of stupidity within his realm of influence.
Oh no, no, he did not abide by that. And he was very giving. Um, there was a time when he did an illustration of Annie for the 400th issue of Superman, where Annie was with Superman in this giant, great pinup thing.
Hmm.
And I mentioned it to him, and I said, "Oh, that came out great. I really loved the illustration." He says, "Oh, I have it here. Would you like the original?" I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." So he goes into his cabinet in his office and he goes through this pile of papers and, stack of papers going through things, and he pulls something out, and it's not an Annie original. It's another original pinup page that he did for DC Comics. And he says, "Oh, this is another character I did for them called Nighthawk. Would you like this one?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And he says, "Okay, you can have this, and I'll look for the Annie one." And so he continues looking. He says, "Oh, here's Annie." So I wound up with two original, wonderful illustrations that I still have this day. But that's just how he was. It was just like, "You want it? Yeah, here."
It seems like people within my generation, and I really don't know how old you are. I'm guessing probably at least a couple decades older than me if you met him like before he even worked on Thundercats. But he seemed to really, really be fond of working on Orphan Annie. Is that just an assumption I'm making, or is that accurate?
Well, the first comic strip he worked on was one called On Stage, which was a very realistic looking comic strip. And he worked on that for over 20 years, and he
Hmm.
created it, and it's very well regarded by a lot of cartoonists, a lot of illustrators, comic book artists, and what have you, got into the business because of the comic strip On Stage. And in fact, a lot of them, such as Walt Simonson, are members of the Leonard Starr Facebook group that I have, just because they love seeing his artwork that I post every day.
Oh, yeah, he's a
And
fantastic,
so
fantastic draftsman.
and so um, when the opportunity came for him to do Annie, because Little Orphan Annie had gone into reprints in the early 70s, and so when the Broadway show became a hit, the syndicate decided to revive it again, and so they approached Leonard about it, and he thought it was a good idea of trying something new, something different. When you've done a comic strip for 22 years, you want to try something different. So he did it, and it was totally a different style than he was used to. And so, if you look at the two different comic strips, Annie and On Stage, you'll see that there's quite a difference, but some similarities as well. He he drew with a brush, and a lot of people can't believe that he got such fine detail with a brush.
That's insane.
And so,
that's
yeah,
that's genuinely insane. I have a hard time inking traditionally in general, but the thing about doing it with a brush, just holy crap, that man had to have precise control. Real quick, I need to address this. Master Sun 42, I have given money. Thank you for the super chat. I have given money to every member of Iconicon except you. I am writing that wrong. Thank you for this. Ironically, I am displaying my Thundercats now. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying the stream and Iconicon. Yeah, him using a brush, like, good God, what the heck?
yeah, yeah. There are people in the Facebook group, who still can't believe that a lot of this detail was done with a brush. And I've seen him work with it, and it's just amazing what he could do with that. And the um, very first piece of artwork that I got from him was an Annie Sunday, and I got that because Leonard would always talk about his attic. And he had an attic that was, well, have you seen Indiana Jones and the at the end when they have everything in the warehouse and stored away?
Yep.
That was sort of like Leonard's attic. Everything he collected over the decades went up into the attic, and it was in no order whatsoever. So I offered to help clean it out for him and organize it, and that took 2 years. And he said, "What would you like for payment?" And I said, "Well, you have this one Annie Sunday that I think is the best thing you've ever done, and I would love that." And so he gave it to me, and I still have that on the wall, and it's my favorite for my favorite story. It's just unbelievable the work that went into this, and this was around the time that he was also starting to work on Thundercats. So um, he just was such a busy individual. He actually was a ghostwriter on two other comic strips in the 80s. And the reason he didn't want credit on them is just because it didn't interest him to be credited on things. He did the he wrote these stories because the artists who were working on them were friends of his, and they needed his help. And so it's like, you need my help? Fine, I'll write you the stories.
Man, that man had a heart
Uh,
of gold, didn't he?
yeah, yeah. And when we came out with the on-stage reprint books, which was a labor of love, it, we went to a couple of comic book conventions with Leonard in New York City. And let me tell you, it was very disappointing, the reception that he got by a lot of people at the convention, because, a lot of the people who were there didn't know who he was. And we would sometimes have to promote him as, look, this is the guy who was head writer on Thundercats.
Yeah.
That was pretty much the only thing they knew him for, even though he had been in comic books and comic strips for 50 years. But there were people, like I said, the professionals who were there that knew who Leonard was and loved his work. And they would come by the booth, and Leonard would just hand them original artwork that we were trying to sell. So it's like, Leonard, you've got to stop giving this artwork to people because we're trying to sell it to raise money. He's like, well, they're such big fans. Yeah, but you don't know them. I can see that you're giving it to people you know, but you don't even know these people. But that's just how generous he was.
So you mentioned previously, before we went live here, that he wound up getting really irritated about his ties to Thundercats, and we'll go into that in a little bit here. But I'm gonna ask real quick. Was it due to that being the major thing people wound up knowing him for and not leaving him alone about it? Was it due to what happened at Rankin Boss, or was that just him just deciding he didn't want anything to do with it at that point?
Well, that's a good question. Let me see if oh, here it is. Um,
Man's got
the whole
notes.
thing's the whole thing started, yeah, only because I don't have the best memory in some things. It's like you're talking 30 something years later. So,
Right?
um, they, I'm sort of responsible for the whole thing
Really?
of what happened. Yeah, I didn't intend for it to happen that way. They came out with the premiere issue of Thundercats magazine, and um, you know, I they had a map in there of Third Earth, and
Ah.
I showed it to Leonard, and he looked at it, and he got very upset because it was an exact replica of the map he had drawn for the series, including all the names, the locations,
Mm-hmm.
everything. I mean, it was exact, and it was credited to somebody else.
Ooh, that's dirty pool just in general back and forth, much less business related things. That would piss me off too.
Yeah, and so he had gone to around that time to Rankin Bass and talked to Jules Bass, because he never had a formal contract. When Thundercats originally started, um, Rankin Bass called him and asked him if he could come to New York, to talk about this project that they were trying to get off the ground. Leonard had done some work for them in the past. He had written some shows and written some scripts for them. So he had a relationship with them and worked with them. And a lot of the deals that he had with them were verbal. And they always mm, held on to their end of the bargain. So, they showed him this these few concept sketches and a logo and a show and a title called Thundercats, and that was all they had. And they said, we don't know what this is going to be about. We want you to write something up about it. Can you do that? And so he went home and he wrote up pretty much a basic Bible for the show, and he gave it to them, and they loved it. Because they said, how do you conceive this thing? And he said, well, just based on what I see, I'm thinking of like an Egyptian type of a motif story. And, work it into a somehow science fiction aspect. And so he always said that in addition to being listed as head writer on the show, he should also have had a credit as developed by,
I don't disagree.
because, you know, if any other writer had been brought in to do work on the show instead of him, you would have a totally different show, because everything you know about the show came from Leonard. The whole Thundera, the whole Third Earth, the whole thing with Mumra and the mutants
Mm-hmm.
and the Burbles, and that's all Leonard.
So I have to ask, would you compare what happened with Leonard Starr to what happened with Bill Finger?
To some degree, yes. It wasn't, believe it or not, it wasn't until the very first episode of Thundercats that um, Leonard first heard the name Ted Wolf. He thought it was a fictitious name that Rankin or Bass had made up um, to retain rights to the show. And he found out some years later that there really was a Ted Wolf. But in all of his time on the show, in meetings and in memos and everything, he never met or heard from this Ted Wolf. Now, I mean, you have a TV show that you supposedly created, and you don't meet with the head writer and developer of the show even once?
That's that's really interesting. And on top of that, like I know that Leonard Starr, he was able to put all that together in a ridiculously short amount of time. And you wouldn't think by looking at the catalog so far of his other work that he'd be really into sci-fi and all that. But I know he was on record due to the book, which you told me was communicated through you, that it was primarily something that he got from studying Tolkien and throwing in some Star Wars there. So the fact that he was able to conceptualize off of what's essentially rough sketches, because to this day, I don't think anybody's ever actually put out, unless I missed something, the sketches Ted Wolf did. I've seen some of the other pre-production stuff, but I don't think anybody's ever seen the actual sketches Ted Wolf did that he gave to the gentleman who sold it to Rankin Boss. So the fact that Leonard was able to do that is just absolutely astounding. The man had an insane imagination.
Oh yeah, and I've seen um, an early concept of Panthro and Jaga, and they do not even look cat-like at all.
No.
I mean, it just amazes me that these are the characters that would later become Jaga and Panthro, because it's like they don't look like them.
No. And even Jaga's final design, like he's supposed to be a jaguar, but he ain't got no spots. So that's just something that took some people a while to realize. I've even ran into some people like within the community in the modern era. They're like, "What type of cat was Jaga?" Like he's a jaguar. That's why it's called Jaga. His original name was
Yeah,
gonna be Jaguar. So
and I mean everybody knows that Lion-O was originally supposed to be Lionel,
mm-hmm.
um, and the they came out with, and I have this wonderful book that they came out for people, that was given to just people involved with the series, called the Thundercats Synopsis and Morals.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 65 shows are listed in here. And the first page will have a synopsis of it, and then a moral of the show written by Dr. Robert Kuisis.
Yes.
And they wanted to show that the shows just weren't lighthearted fluff, that they were stories that had morals, and that they were beneficial to children, and that this was, being slightly educational without throwing it right in their face.
Yeah.
And Leonard told me that he actually got the idea for some of his stories from the Aesop stories.
Mm-hmm. Which are
And
classics.
Yeah, and he says, the basic themes. Just take the basic themes of some of these old Aesop stories, and you can have a Thundercat story. And he actually even invited me to write a script for Thundercats just because they were so desperate to get stories. And he said some of the story submissions that they got were totally unusable.
Yeah.
There was some, I mean, he said there were some stories that came in that never even featured the Thundercats.
Well, that's interesting.
And it's like, well, the show is called Thundercats. We need to have these characters in them. Uh,
Yeah, reading through the book, like you see, some writers were stronger than others. Of course, Leonard Starr, in my opinion, I think his scripts were the strongest. But
mhm.
you have people like William Overgard that, man, sometimes he could write a really solid story, and then like a year later, like, oh my god, what happened? This other story you're writing is insane. What's wrong with you?
And part of that might be because in the beginning, Leonard mm, helped rewrite all the other scripts that he didn't write. So any story submitted by another writer would go through him, and he'd end up fixing it.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
and so when he was no longer involved with the show, writers who looked good earlier didn't look as good later because you didn't have Leonard's influence on their scripts.
And he wound up bowing out like after the beginning of the second season, if I'm not correct, because he wound up ultimately going to work on Silverhawks for a little bit.
Well, he went to the Silverhawks, yeah, because and let me tell you, that Silverhawks thing, I never got too involved with it, but I remember when I went up into his attic one time, I was in one corner, one dusty corner, dark dusty corner, and there were all these Silverhawk scripts there.
Ooh.
And I said, "What are you doing with all these?" He says, "Oh yeah, I was involved in that show for a little while, helping with the development. They needed some help with some things, and so I decided to help with that too." I said, "While you're doing Thundercats?" And yeah, and on another part of the attic, he had all his Thundercat scripts. And so at that point, I said, "Are you going to use these Thundercat scripts for anything?" He says, "No, I'm not too interested in keeping them. If you want them, take them." So I have all the Thundercat scripts, and some of them are first drafts, and I think one or two might be episodes that never got produced.
Holy crap! You're sitting on a treasure trove of lost information. Like you made an allusion to Indiana Jones earlier. You are like the person who keeps the stories and the treasures. Good lord.
Yeah, well, I guess I have a binder here that I'm looking at right now that just features copies of memos that were put out by Jules Bass and by Leonard about the show. And like, here's one to Thundercats writers from Peter Lawrence, and it's dated January 11th, 1985. And it goes and talks about the characters from the first 50 shows and blah, 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 blah. And so, like I said, these are memos that probably the only copies of these things that still exist.
Well, I'd imagine. I mean, if somebody goes to your house and has to see them, do they have to point out which like inking brush was actually Leonard Starr's, and if they choose poorly, do they die? I mean, come on, good
No,
lord.
but I mean, it's just, oh yeah, I'm just now looking at the picture of Panthro, and oh my God.
That's just that wasn't that basically just a big black guy wearing a leotard?
Yes!
Yeah.
Um, and also I have, which is also a really rare treat that most people haven't seen, is an early presentation reel that they created that introduced the characters to TV affiliates, featuring different version of the theme song, early character concepts of the Thundercats, including the rare version of Panthro and Jaga. So this was a videotape that Leonard had in his attic that he gave me, and so I transferred it onto DVD just to preserve it. But it's this great, 20-minute video that predates the show.
Holy crap. That is amazing. Like you are You are the lore keeper here in ways that people like me only could dream to be. That's insane.
Well, it's a lot because of the fact that, like I said, I knew Leonard well, and I was probably one of the few people within his circle of friends that had any interest in Thundercats. I mean, most of the other, at the time I was in my 20s, and um, at the time, most of the people in a circle of friends were in their 50s and 60s. So, what they care about this silly kids cartoon show, according to them.
Yeah. And granted, I still think Thundercats is better than some things we have currently going on right now, anyways. But subjective values here. Uh, I know that he wound up leaving Thundercats, and as we said, and went to Silverhawks. And in Hear the Roar, um, he did not, from what was written about his statements, that man did not sound happy about Silverhawks. Specifically citing that Jules Bass was way too involved and getting too busy in the scripts himself instead of apparently not doing that, and that's why the show suffered. Were these things he also told you as well?
Yes, yes, he felt that the show was a weak attempt to try and recreate the popularity of Thundercats, and that Jules wanted a heavier hand on it so that this way he could control more and have more control of the money and what have you. And so, he said that Rankin Bass did not like paying people during the show of Thundercats. They at one point they didn't even want to pay the animators,
Really?
and but they were forced to because if they didn't, they wouldn't get their cartoons.
Obviously, but it seems like they put a lot of money into it, so they seem like they did get paid fairly well. I know that the voice actors, I heard that they didn't get paid. Um, some of them didn't get paid all that well, but specifically Earl Hyman went on record saying it was the best he had gotten paid for doing any sort of work like that. And that was a classically trained Othellan actor. So hearing they didn't like paying people is kind of weird. It makes me wonder about the rest of the animation industry at the time.
Well, I don't know, and the thing is that he had little control over the voice actors, and he even told me that when he created Snarf, he had in his mind an image of a different voice for Snarf than the one that they actually came out with. He was not a fan of the voice of Snarf. I don't know about you, but I am not a fan of that voice either.
I'm a fan of Bob McFadden because the man had like an absurd amount of rage or range. But what voice was he imagining for Snarf?
Oh yeah, no, I like the actor who did the voice. I mean, he's done a lot of great stuff over the years. I mean, nothing against him
Yeah,
personally. But when he was writing Snarf, believe it or not, I don't know if you've ever heard of the ventriloquist Edgar Bergen.
I have not.
Okay, Edgar Bergen was and this is one of the strangest stories of old time radio. Edgar Bergen was a very popular radio performer, and his whole shtick, as it were, is that he was a ventriloquist, and he had these puppets that he used, and he would be a ventriloquist on the radio. So you have a medium where you don't see the person performing, and he's supposedly not moving his lips. How do you know that? It's radio. You can't see him. So his two most popular characters, and you have to remember Leonard, like I said, grew up listening to radio, and so he was influenced by it. And so even though old time radio was long before my time, I knew about it because it was a hobby of mine. So I knew who Edgar Bergen was, and one of the characters that Edgar Bergen had was a dummy called Mortimer Snurd, and he had a really dopey type of voice, like, "Oh, yep, yep, that's for sure. Yep, I believe you on that one. Uh-huh.
Oh, like Buzzy Buzzard.
Yep." So that would be the closest sounding type of a voice for what Snarf was like when Leonard did it and wrote him.
That would definitely have been different.
Yeah, and for me it would have been less annoying.
True, but
I could not stand that snarf snarf.
yeah, Snarf was mastering that long before Pokemon existed. But as I've gotten older, I'm starting to understand Snarf was he was more there for your parents to identify with, like learning that, watching how my mom would react to him. He's like, "Oh, Lionel, I don't know if we should do this. It's not safe." My mom be like, "Yeah, he makes sense."
And I mean, part of the problem too is, Lionel, even though he is in the body of an adult, he still has a child's mind
Yep.
to some degree because, his body aged during the trip, but not his mind.
Exactly. So on top of that, the unfortunate aspect of Snarf is he had to try to go from uh, being this kid's parent to, I don't need you anymore. I'm an adult. And he's like, holy crap, what do I do with my life now? Like that's usually in reality a very gradual thing, and even reality, some parents struggle with that transition from being the parent to the child being adult. With Snarf, it happened like in the middle of a nap time, so it's an interesting thing to see the character struggle with and ultimately come to terms with, and Lion-O never really discarding him. So I enjoy Snarf as a character. I know he gets on a lot of people's nerves, but being older now and understanding him a little more, I have a newfound appreciation for him I didn't when I was a kid. But um, we talked a little bit about uh, Rankin Boss and
Hmm.
what happened with Leonard Starr. So they made a promise to him, and
Yes.
they did not keep it. Do you have any idea why they didn't? Because it seems like a really superfluous thing to not give somebody.
Well, he had been after them for some time for the for a written contract, but he always got excuses such as, we're busy now, we don't have time. And he was also very busy too, because, like I said, in addition to writing a lot of the stories for Thundercats, he was also reading all the stories that were submitted and rewriting most of them. And so, and then on top of that, writing and drawing Annie, which a lot of cartoonists don't do. A lot of cartoonists will either write the comic strip or draw a comic strip, but not a lot will write and draw a comic strip. And so he was not too worried about it at first. And I'm trying to find my notes here because I want to quote him as to what he said. Um, let's see, because it all was down to Jules and um, dealing with Jules in this regards. Ah, here we go. Oh, here comes the fun part. After about 2 years, I asked Jules about residuals again. His response, "Oh, we can't give residuals on a cheap show like this." "Oh, well, has that formal contract in preparation been prepared yet?" I asked. "Look," says Jules, "if you want to sue us, sue us. It'll cost you a lot of money and you'll lose." And I was stunned. He jumps right from, "How about the contract?" to "Sue us?" He, he says there's a Mexican curse that goes, "May your life be filled with lawyers." And here it was, lawyer time. So he ended up going to a firm on Madison Avenue and started the paperwork going with suing Rankin Bass over his residuals that he wasn't getting. And it all came down to the fact, like I said, Rankin Bass didn't want to pay people. They wanted to keep the money. They had a ton of money coming in that they never expected. I mean, nobody expected this thing to take off like it did. And the money that they were making from the sales of toys and, you know, from syndication was more than they had ever seen. I mean, Rankin Bass, up until that point, had just done cheap Saturday morning cartoon shows. And so now this was their biggest foray into syndication. And so, they were making money hand over fist and they liked it, but they didn't like having to share it.
Hmm. I've seen that happen before in other productions too. One that's 90s related but really infamous is what happened with Power Rangers and Saban. Of course, it was really cheap to produce, and they were really gambling on whether or not the audience would enjoy it. But it became a massive success. And when three of the actors were like, you're getting all this money, and can you raise our pay? They refused to. They could have. They chose not to. And I'm seeing this happened throughout a lot of things, and unfortunately, of course, it happens at Rankin Bass. So after that, it sounds like it really kind of went downhill. I know he didn't win the case, but on top of that, wasn't Jules one of his friends? Like that had to sting.
Yes, and it really did hurt him because, like I said, he had worked with them before. I even have here a copy of a script that he wrote as a proposal for a motion picture that they were going to produce back in 1978, and the tentative title was called Murder on the Hong Kong Express, and it's about 156 pages, and it was never produced. But I also have scripts that he did produce for them, that he wrote for them that were produced. The Red Baron, it was a Saturday morning TV special that he wrote. He also wrote one about Charlie Chaplin and W.C. Fields for them. So he had written quite a lot for them and knew them. And strange little story here is that Leonard's third wife, Bobby, was Arthur Rankin's ex-wife.
Yeah, I've read about that, and I've sat back thinking, how would this man have like emotionally ran the gamut here, dealing with like an employer that did him wrong. That employer, at least one of them, was his friend, and then he winds up marrying the previous wife of one of them. Like that's something you would look at like if it was fiction and think this is really far fetched, and then you find out it's reality. You're like, wait a minute, how did this happen?
Yeah, and you know, I knew Bobby for many years because, like I said, she was also one of our guests at our wedding. In fact, I remember uh, Leonard's second wife was Betty, and Betty was the model for the main character of his first comic strip on stage, Mary Perkins. If you saw his wife Betty and you saw the character of Mary Perkins, they were identical pretty much. So he based her looks on Betty. And when I first met Leonard, that's who he was married to. And I met her many times, spoke with her at the house. Very pleasant, lovely lady. And I remember the time when I went to their studio in downtown Westport, just dropped in for a visit, and Leonard wasn't there, but Stan was. And so I saw Stan, and I said, "How you doing?" And he says, "Oh, the usual." And I said, "Well, I came here looking for Leonard, and I don't see him. Where is he?" And he looks at me, and he says, "You haven't heard?" I said, "Heard what?" He says, "Betty passed away. She was at the house delivering him his lunch on the second floor, and when she was coming down the stairs, she slipped, fell, and broke her neck."
That's terrible.
And I was like dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. And, you know, he was a widower for a couple of years. And shortly after the time I got married, or around actually I shouldn't say the time I got married, but before, when I was dating my future wife, Leonard started dating Bobby. He had known Bobby. Bobby was a friend of Betty's, and he sort of reconnected with her, and the relationship formed. And he was pretty much like, the old story about the love-struck teenage boy. you know, that's exactly what he was like, and he just couldn't stop talking about her, and he would talk to me about her nonstop. And it's just so nice to have somebody with that kind of relationship talk about, how he felt about people. And you know,
Yeah,
he was just a great guy.
it's a really shame I never get to meet the man. That's on me though. I should have at some point, even when I got Hear the Roar, I should have said, you know what, Thomas, maybe you ought to use your brain and start meeting these people. But nope, that didn't happen until 2016. So that's on me for being stupid.
Yeah, it does happen. I mean, there are times when I say, why didn't I take more pictures of different things? I met so many people through Leonard. I went to so many things because of Leonard, and I was just so caught up in the moment that I never thought of things like maybe I should take pictures and better document this stuff because this won't be around forever.
Is that why? And I know we talked about this in conversation before. Is that why you planned on scanning in a lot of this stuff?
Yes, yes. I mean, I have a large collection of his artwork, his stories, and photos, just so many things that, I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of pages of things. And um, unfortunately, some of it, when I started to scan it, I scanned it at a lower DPI. So now I have to go back and rescan it at a higher DPI. You know, stupid me, but, um, and, um, what was the thing that I was just thinking of? It wasn't, there's just so many things. Oh, video. Back in the day, when Leonard was still working on Thundercats, he went to the Museum of Cartoon Art in New York. I think it was New York, Rybrook, New York. And he did a talk there that was about an hour or so long in front of a large group of kids. And of course, they were all there to listen to him talk about Thundercats. And so while he was there talking about Thundercats, he was also drawing on a large sheet of paper
Mm-hmm.
various characters from Thundercats and also some from Annie, and talking about the show and talking about the characters. And just, he talked more about Thundercats in that hour-long thing than I've ever heard him talk about Thundercats at one time. And I was fortunate in that I did videotape it on my camcorder. And so that's something that I've put onto DVD, but I've yet to figure out how to upload that onto any website.
Well, if you ever need help with anything, I'm more than willing to help. I can help you get that online, and I actually have a pretty high quality scanner with an auto feeder for scanning things at a high DPI. So if you ever need help, I'm willing to help.
Okay, well that's good to know because like I said, just the fact that this is the only record of him um, talking about Thundercats and actually drawing the characters because even though he was an artist on the show, his main job was writer,
Hmm.
so he wasn't heavily involved in the drawing of the characters type of thing. And so it was nice seeing him actually draw the characters while he was talking about it. um, a lot of writers don't get that opportunity. One of my favorite authors of comic books is Peter David, and you know great writer, can't draw.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Unfortunately, a lot of my favorite comic people have also passed. Jim Aparo passed in the early 2000s. Dennis O'Neil
Mm.
recently passed, of course. So, um, yeah, it's never easy, and in some cases, you just lose a lot of stuff. But the fact that you were there, and the fact that you've been able to hold on to all this stuff, like what's it like knowing that you hold on and have things that nobody else has seen and up till now most people weren't even aware of? Does it like is it like a burden, or is it something that feels good to you?
Oh, it feels good to me because it's a way I have of trying to keep Leonard's legacy going and to keep his memory going. And that was one reason why I created a Facebook group dedicated to him because at one point years ago I said I went looking for a Facebook group about him so I could join it, and I said there's no Facebook group about him. That's amazing. So I created one and just started posting stuff, and little by little people started joining, and eventually a couple of artists found out about it, and then they started telling their other artist friends about it, and that's when things took off. And so even to this day, I'll post something in the group, and one of the artists will repost it on their timeline and say, just look at the work of this man. Isn't this amazing? And here's somebody that's revered by a lot of comic book fans, and
Hmm.
yet Leonard was their idol.
So, the name of the Facebook page is the Leonard Starr Appreciation Group, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So, Master Son asked about that, so I'm going ahead and answer that publicly. Um,
And I do post on there a daily Annie strip and a daily on stage strip, but I also try to, from time to time, also post other things from his career, such as some Thundercat stuff. I've also posted material from an animated series that he created after Thundercats called Wolfmark, and he created a Bible for that and the characters for that. And he was very enthusiastic about it and very hopeful that it would get off the ground. And so, like I said, I have drawings of those characters and also the Bible, and little by little I post stuff about that.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of the stuff, of course, on DeviantArt that you posted. Um, it's just amazing because those are actually in really high quality, especially compared to a lot of the other stuff that was out there. So if I ever need to do stuff like sketching on Thundercats, that's what we tend to refer to. My friend Dusan, what he has done is he's taken a lot of the model sheets that have been posted, and he's
Hmm.
been able to source what the animation cell colors were, and has created colored model sheets for all the characters we get source colors for. So he's done amazing work on that too.
That is a labor of love, and definitely. We have a person in the group who is recoloring the onstage Sunday pages, and what he's doing is he's taking the original black and white proof sheets that I have, and he's colorizing them digitally and improving them so that they look the way they should have looked back in the day.
Nice.
And that was another nice thing too, is that when Leonard was doing Annie, the syndicate sent him proof sheets. And what proof sheets are what the syndicate creates from the original art. They're copies of the original art, and they'll lay out 6 dailies on a sheet of paper, and they'll send that to the newspapers, and the newspapers would use that to print from for that day's worth of comic strips. So they would, do a paste up of it and all this and that, and they would be able to print from that. So this stuff that I have, the proof sheets, are about as clean copy as you can get, reproduction wise. And so Leonard gave me all of the proof sheets, both Sundays and dailies for Annie. And when I would go visit him, he'd point to a pile in one of his rooms and go, "Oh, there's the latest group of that's come in."
I had somebody in the chat ask, did Leonard Starr have much involvement in the Rankin Boss product of the comic strip or Tiger Sharks? I can't remember if he did or not.
He did have copies of the scripts in his collection and also some of the storyboards. In fact, I think I have some of those down in my collection, because they were mixed in with other items that he had in his attic. And so sometimes when I would bring something home and I think it's all Thundercats, I'd look and it's like, oh, what is this comic strip thing, comic character thing here? And, or these characters, I'm not too sure of this. And then I take a look online and it's like, oh, okay, these are another project that was going on at the same time, that he was asked about. And like I said, Rankin Bass knew of his work, that he was a good writer, had a very good imagination, and so they were constantly coming to him to ask him to help improve or review something and tell him how they could make it better.
So we're not going to give you what you want. We're not going to pay you what you're worth, but please fix our product.
Yep.
Doggone it. Corporations. All right. Speaking of corporations, we're going to get into a little bit of the more harder tooth stuff, if that's okay. So I'm sure you've at least heard. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but you've. I'll go ahead and ask. Have you seen any of the two Thundercat revival cartoons, or read any of the modern comics?
You'll probably hate me,
Go for it.
but I have seen the two revival cartoons of Thundercats.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the first revival I didn't like, but I liked it more after I saw the second revival. Uh, I said, my God, if Leonard saw this, he would be spinning in his grave right now.
Oh, so he would not have had a very fond opinion of them, huh?
Not of the second one. The first one, he probably would have liked the animation on it because the animation um, had a better look to it. It was more refined, um, very real, more realistic look to it. With me, my problem with it were the scripts,
Yeah,
the stories.
they and I've actually owed my subscribers two reviews of the series, one as standalone and another compared to the original cartoon. Uh, they did not have very strong script writing in there, and character progression was two steps forward, three steps back. It was very frustrating to watch the first time around.
hmm And I mean, I remember seeing Thundercats for the first time as a nighttime TV special. I think it was like a 2-hour movie where they took the first 4 episodes and combined them into a feature-length movie. And that's how Leonard wrote them, so
Yeah,
that they could be done either independently or combined as a movie. And I remember seeing that for the first time, and I said, for an animated show, this is extremely well written.
it is.
I mean, the characters, the story, everything is just amazing.
That's only been released so far on VHS. It's never gotten a DVD release. And there's a gentleman by the name of Bushman who he has gone through the entire original VHS that has that Exodus movie and has digitally enhanced it to HD quality,
Mm.
like frame by frame. So we got at least a few people in the community that do actual labors of love instead of just getting angry when you're critical of things. So like, good God, that man is a dynamo of stuff like that. So it's been really interesting to see how that's being extrapolated.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I mentioned before about the New York comic conventions that we would go to from time to time, I would actually bring with me copies of the Thundercat scripts that Leonard had written, and I would put them for sale on the table. And I would tell people, the man who wrote these is right here. You can get him to autograph them. And I also would put in several pages of the production artwork in with them. And do you know how few of those I sold? And you would I literally poop your pants if you knew how much I was selling those things for.
Lay it on me, man.
$5.
I'll pay you 10 for a copy of every script you've got. Heck no, I'd pay you 20 for a copy of every single script. Good God, you were among Philistines.
It was unbelievable. I mean, these people would go and pay $200 to an artist who I had never heard of, and I'd look at the sketch that they got, and I said, "You pay $200 for that thing, and yet you won't pay $5 for a script of a TV show that you say you love, and the writer is right here, and yet you won't pay five lousy dollars." I mean, I'm not a person who goes to conventions all the time and sells these things for a living. This is like a rare opportunity here. And when I met at one of the conventions, the person who did the voice of Lion-O, I actually gave him a couple of copies of the scripts because he never kept any, and he loved the production artwork that was included in them,
Mm-hmm.
and I got him to sign my copy of the Thundercats Roar book. So my copy is signed by him and by Leonard. That's about the only two signatures I got in the book.
Man, absolute champion status. I have the plastic toy sword of omens signed by Larry Kinney. That man is just he is an absolute lovable man.
Oh,
He's much taller than I expected him to be, but man, he is an absolute joy to be around.
yeah, he was a very nice, friendly, happy-go-lucky type of guy. It was, I wish I had had more time to talk to him. And speaking of toys, one of the things I'm most upset about with Leonard, and I can't fault him for this because, like I said, he was a very giving person, is that he was given all the toys from the toy line of Thundercats in the beginning.
Hmm.
He gave them out to the kids of people that he knew.
That's doggone adorable.
And it's like, you couldn't save a couple for me?
Well, Leonard being an older guy, he's probably like, toys are made for kids, so I give the toys
Yeah.
to kids.
And he had no interest in them. It's like, it's a toy. I don't know. I'm 59 years old. I'm not gonna play with this toy. I mean, I have pictures, promotional photos of toys that were produced.
Hmm.
Um, the Groon the Destroyer, Termar, Termagar the Tuska, and various ones that LJN Toys came out with. And I also have some concept drawings for toys that they were planning on making. And I think I posted a few of those online as well, on one of the sites. And, I don't know if any of those proposed toys ever got made or not, because since Leonard didn't hold on to these toys, I don't know what got made, what
Well,
didn't got made.
well, I can tell you what got made, and I can tell you what didn't. The last line before they closed up because there was gonna be one more wave, and they canceled it. But they wound up canceling the Thunderstrike, Red Eye, a couple of the other Rampager figures that had action gimmicks to it, and like a few more prototypes of other like one-shot characters. They like a swamp monster and stuff like that. Not really show-related characters, with the exception of Red Eye. Most of the stuff did go in production. Some of the later stuff is hard to find, like the Tungosaurus, the Astromote monster, the Stinger, the Driller. But the thing about the toy line is it was very unique, but unfortunately it worked against it because it seemed like LJN was more interested in what neat concept can we make the toy do instead of can the toy work. So a lot of Thundercat figures are broken.
This one that I'm looking at now is something called Bubble Man, Bubbla,
Bubba?
and yeah, it opens and it closes. So it's like a rounded figure with arms and little legs, and I guess when the head pops up, you can push it down and it'll blow bubbles out of the stomach.
Yeah, the Mad Bubbler, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, well, on here it's called Bubble
Bubbler.
Man quotations Bubbla.
God. No.
And then there's also one here of a Lion-O in this weird contraption that looks like it came out of Star Wars. It's got these two long metallic legs, and it's like holding him in the waist, and his feet are dangling in the
The
air.
Stilt Runner. Yeah, that hit too, and God, a broken one goes for 900. It's frustrating, man. You see, as much as I like the Thundercat toy line, I'm far more fond of the show and the writing and the characters because
Hmm.
I could not sit there and say, yeah, $900 for that. Sure, no, I can't do that. like like monetarily I could, but I couldn't justify it.
Oh yeah, no, I understand, and I mean some of these sketches that I have, the early production sketches, are things where they talk about possible powers and abilities to give the Thundercats, and you know, um, like here's one: Panthro has the ability to shift the weight of one mass to another,
That would have been cool.
transferring the weight of boulders to the mutant below. He renders them too heavy to do any serious mischief. Wily Cat's waist rope can grow out like the old Indian rope trick and hoist him into the air.
That was actually somewhat seen, but not like in terms of like a snake. He would chuck it down and he'd jump up and it would stay rigid. Do you own any of the Thundercat figures at the time currently?
Figures? No. No, it's one of the things that I never got into acquiring. Probably because it seemed like the market was saturated with them and I never knew what to collect.
Is it something you're interested in?
The toys, not as much.
Okay.
Probably because I have more toys than I can possibly deal with of other shows. My problem is I'm a collector. I'm like Leonard. Leonard was a collector. I'm a collector. A lot of people who didn't know Leonard are surprised to find out that he was an opera lover, and he would listen to opera when he drew.
Doesn't surprise me.
And he didn't always start off as an opera lover. He was introduced to it by someone, and he was surprised at how good it was. And he tried many times to get me into it, and I just sat there and said, "Okay, it's like Shakespeare to me, Leonard. I don't understand it."
I did have one real quick question here from
Yep,
Vinkman, a longtime fan of the channel. He wanted
sure.
to know what Leonard's thoughts were of the 1982 Annie production.
He was not a fan.
Oh boy.
He thought it was too overproduced. It was too over the top. He
Ah,
said, Annie is a simple story. It's, if you look at the Broadway show and then you look at the movie, he said they went crazy on this thing. It's like they were given all this money and they just had to spend it on everything going. And what some people don't know is that there were a couple of sequels to the Broadway Annie show. One of them was called Miss Hannigan's Revenge, which was a huge bomb,
oof.
and the other one was called Annie Warbucks, and that one was fairly successful. And the reason for it is that it picked up right after where the original play left off. In fact, the song that they sing at the end of the first Broadway musical, "We're Getting a New Deal for Christmas," is how they begin the the sequel of Annie Warbucks. And the original CD that came out with that has like a 30-page booklet inside featuring all new original artwork drawn by Leonard based on the story for that play.
Goodness.
And it's really, I mean, it's got some good music. I like the music in it, but it's to me it's worth it because of that great booklet inside featuring all this original Annie artwork that unless you've gotten the CD, nobody has seen before.
Did Leonard Starr understand the concept of vacation and taking a break? Because it seems like all he ever did was work.
I very rarely saw him ever take a vacation. If you said to him, "Okay, are you going away for a week or so somewhere?" and he would laugh and say, "Why? When do I have time?" Uh,
Goodness.
he just he continued to work up until his retirement, which was in 2000, and so um, that was when he did his last Annie story. Was in the year it came out in the last Annie story ended in February of 2000, and at that point, you know, he was almost 75 years old,
Hmm.
and he actually asked me if I would help him write the last Annie story, which I did. So I'm the only other person other than Leonard who actually had a hand at writing an Annie story for that 20-year period that he did it.
That's certainly something to put on a resume.
Yeah, yeah. If people are like, they know who Annie is. Um, and he asked me what I wanted for payment for it, and I said, I'll take the original art from the story. He's like, you got it.
A man knows his priorities.
Well, to Leonard, once he was done with the original art, he had no more need for it. So, it was for the most part was just gathering dust up in his attic. Um, and so, you know, you want it? Great. He was just happy that somebody out there appreciated his work. In fact, one day when I was cleaning out his attic, I saw a large cardboard box, which was not unusual. I was always uncovering cardboard boxes, and 90% of the time they were empty. And I stopped asking him why he had empty cardboard boxes in his attic, because the answer was always, well, I might need it to ship something out one day.
A fair answer.
So, I'm getting ready to take this cardboard box, which I think is empty because I look in it and it looks empty, and then I notice, oh, there's a large piece of paper in here. And so I pull it out and I unfold it, and it's the original artwork to the very first onstage Sunday that he ever did. And I brought it down and I said, is this the original art to the very first on stage? And he says, "Oh yeah, where was that?" I said, "It was in a box up in the attic." He says, "Oh, is that where I left it?" "Oh, okay." He says, and he looks and he goes, "Do you want it?" I'm
Oh
like,
God.
Leonard, you should know never to ask me that because my answer will always
Always
be
be yes.
yes.
We have a chat question for you. He says, of the works Leonard did, which one do you think was the best?
Me personally, hands down, Annie. Um, I have a friend in Germany who is not a comic strip reader. He's not a big fan of comic strips, and I sent him my favorite Annie story, which is I think the 15th one that Leonard wrote and drew. And I said, and he knew nothing about Annie. And I said, read this story, and if you don't like it, fine. But to me, this is the best story I've ever seen in my life. And so he read it and he's like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I got to see more of this strip. Where do I get it from? And I said, you're talking to the person. And so I've been sending him little by little in order the Annie stories that Leonard did, and he just loves them. He says Leonard is such a fantastic writer, and I mean, you know, the stories that Leonard wrote for Thundercats
Mm-hmm.
were probably the best written stories of the series,
Without question.
and that's pretty much what it's like reading Annie, is that every story you read is just so amazing, and you can't believe that he can go from one type of story to another type of story and make it so interesting and come up with so many funny lines and wonderfully named characters. I mean, he loves puns, and the puns of these names of characters. He has a Russian ballet dancer in one of them, and her name is Anya Toz.
Are you kidding me?
No? And it took me a while before I got that joke because it was always, oh, Ms. Toes isn't going to like this. Ms. Toes won't like it. And then later somebody says, Anya, what are you going to do about this? And then finally it got to me and I said, wait a minute, Anya Toes? Oh my God.
He's a master of the dad jokes, huh?
Oh, he's just got so many great names in there. Angela Pease is another one, and it took me a while before I figured out Angela Pease, Angel of Peace.
Ah.
And she's this wonderful woman who is a do-gooder. She always fights for the environment and people's rights and what have you, and a very sweet, beautiful-looking woman, and becomes a love interest in Daddy Warbucks' life, but that's another story. But the story I'm talking about with Leonard and with the Annie story is there's this character created for Annie many years ago, not by Leonard, called Mr. Am. Mr. Am is a mysterious character who comes into Annie's life every so often, looks sort of like Santa Claus. You can't be sure if he's Santa Claus, if he's an alien, if he's God. This man has such amazing powers. I mean, he he could wipe out Superman with just a bat of his hand. I mean, this guy is so freaking unbelievable. And to this day, nobody knows exactly who he is other than Mr. Am. He supposedly has lived forever.
Huh.
And in the Annie story, Annie meets this evil person called Mr. Rune, who's mm, tempting Annie and turning her slightly evil. And that draws in the attention of Mr. Am, and it turns out that Mr. Rune is a very old adversary of Mr. Am, and they have this galactic fight together that goes through the ages of like mankind, and it's almost like a fight between the devil and God
Hmm.
in the story of Annie. And the artwork in it is unbelievable. It goes from dinosaurs and cavemen to knights in armor and all this stuff, and the resolution of the story is freaking unbelievable because Annie is the main character of the story, and she's watching these two all-powerful beings fight one another, and you have to figure out how is this insignificant little girl going to have any kind of impact on this battle, and Leonard does it beautifully.
And
Oh
these
my God.
and these are all found in collected editions, right?
Nope, never been collected before.
Okay, that needs to be corrected like immediately.
That's why I started to post the Annie adventures in sequence from the very beginning of Leonard's tenure in the group. And in fact, next month is when I start posting this story that I'm talking about.
Perfect timing.
And it is just, like I said, I actually can't wait for people to start reading this and to see, because the artwork in it is unbelievable. The story is unbelievable. And just like I said, the resolution, oh my God. You know, if you're a fan of Thundercats, you really should read these Annie stories.
Well, I'm certainly going to. I don't see everything because my feed is filled with a bunch of stuff, but I like your post pretty regularly, and trust me, when I like it, it's because I read it. So I'm familiar with a little bit of it, thankfully, and I know that on stage though it's been collected. I don't know if it's complete or not, and I think some of the volumes are out of print currently, but I know it's been collected to an extent.
It is collected and it is complete, and
Awesome.
that actually is a miracle because we could not get a publisher to publish that series. And it was actually due to the efforts of another fan of Leonard's who created his own publishing company just so he could publish the onstage books. And he got his source material from me because I actually created a complete collection of the onstage stories because I wanted to read them. I never read them in when they were in the comic strips, and I saw them all over Leonard's attic, and I said, well, I have to put them in some sort of order. And so I made photocopies, and what he didn't have proof sheets of, I would make photocopies of the original art and create my own proof sheets. And, you know, and it was just a labor of love on my part of making photocopies for several years just to make a complete series of On Stage.
Hmm. It's weird how many publishing companies they're very picky about what they publish in some cases, but then they'll turn around and publish absolute garbage that gets them nothing. I don't get it.
I don't understand it either. I mean, I've seen them come out with sometimes like, oh, we're going to reprint Dick Tracy. Like, again, isn't this like the fourth time if people have reprinted Dick Tracy in one form or another? Or we're going to reprint Prince Valiant, or we're going to reprint this strip or that strip. It's like they've all been reprinted numerous times. There are great strips out there that deserve to be reprinted at least once. And, you know, and that's why we wanted to do On Stage for a long time, but every time we approached a publisher, they're like, no, it's too obscure, not enough people know about it, it won't have very many sales. And I mean, when we came out with the first volume, we didn't know how it would sell. We were hoping that we would sell enough copies that we would make enough money to pay for the second volume to come out. And, we hoped that each volume would make enough money to do the next volume. And that's how it was. And Leonard was involved in creating the covers. I helped with that too. The whole publication of the series was up to pretty much three people. I'd say 80% of it was the publisher, 15% was me, and 5% was one other person. And my part was actually all prior to the publication of the books because, like I said, I had to compile all of that artwork for a good 10 years before it actually ever went into print.
Hmm.
But yeah, like I said, of Leonard's work, Annie will always be my favorite, even though I've seen a lot of his other stuff.
So now that that's been published to completion, do you think it's possible that maybe other printing companies might see that being successful and maybe actually getting off their duffs and producing the Annie strips in a collected format, or do you think they're still going to be ignorant?
Well, the thing is that there's a company that has been reprinting the original Little Orphan Annie by Harold Gray, and when they acquired the rights from the syndicate to do that, they also acquired the rights to all of the Annie stories, even including Leonard's. And when the person who was doing the on-stage books approached them about doing Annie, they said, "No, we're only interested in doing Harold Gray stuff. We're not interested in doing Leonard stuff." Because again, they didn't think there would be much of a market for it.
Are these people just stupid? Is that what we're dealing with here? Are we just dealing with morons?
I sometimes ask myself that same question because there are a lot of people in the group who only knew Leonard from on stage because, like I said, to them that was the greatest strip ever. And now a lot of them are seeing Annie for the first time and they're really starting to appreciate it for what it is, because a lot of them were upset with Annie because they felt Leonard stopped doing on stage so he could do Annie, and they were upset with Annie because he stopped doing my favorite strip to do this strip, so I'm not going to read this strip because he's not doing my favorite strip now. So they're looking at it in a different light and saying, wow, these stories are really great, and this artwork is really good. And, I hope one day that the right person will see it and maybe convince the people who have the rights to reprint Annie to give a go with Leonard's Annie. Because, like I said, it wasn't until the right fan came along and saw that I had all the on-stage material that he decided to take the leap, go into publishing himself, contact the syndicate, get the rights to reprint the on-stage stories, and started doing it himself. Taught himself how to become a publisher. And that's the sign of a true Leonard fan.
Good Lord.
So, like I said, he had quite a career, and people know him for various things.
Apparently. And while most people, not just in the chat, but of course myself and others, primarily know him for his work on Thundercats, and it seems like his work was uh, varied in a lot of different genres, a lot of different mediums, and that's a very skilled, a very talented man to be able to pull all that off.
Yeah, especially when you consider that since he was the head writer and was so heavily involved in writing of Thundercats, that for a good part of his career, he was just an illustrator. Writing wasn't something he enjoyed doing. He would tell me many times, "Oh my God, I would rather be drawing than I would writing because um, I'm a writer myself. I write on the side. I've done like 8 illustrated novels, and unfortunately, I don't illustrate them. I get comic book artists to illustrate them for me. But one thing I'll always say, as a writer, is that you start off with a blank piece of paper. There's nothing there. You have to come up with all the ideas of the characters, the story, and everything, and put them on that paper. Whereas with an illustrator, they're working from a script most of the time. They've already got an idea down, and that's something at least for them to have as a springboard to start doing what they have to do. It's like they gave the illustrators, the animators in Japan, the scripts for Thundercats. They're able to animate from that. Of course, they did make some mistakes. I think there was one part where they talk about this beautiful blue planet and it's colored green in the series.
Yeah, according to the book, it said that, and not just the book, but also the interviews done. The Japanese studio is very, very fond of saying, "Yes, we can do that," and then admitting later on we had no clue how to do that. So.
Yeah, the story of many of an actor. Ride a horse? Oh hell yeah, I know how to ride a horse.
Yeah, and I know Leonard particularly was not happy because they completely changed the design of the Sword of Omens. He's like, I had it all figured out. I was gonna have a binocular and the cross guard and a hole in it, and it comes back it's completely different. I didn't like it.
Oh yeah, no, he talked about that many times. In fact, I have the illustration of the sword that he drew, and you know, it's just somewhat different from what they finally came out with, and he would complain about that.
Yeah, that's the one that was seen in the promotional image. That's pretty iconic now. If I'm not mistaken, that's the sword design there.
hmm And yeah, it's one of those things that just frustrates you as a writer is that you write this come up with this idea, write it down, even sketch it out, and then when it comes through, it doesn't look like what I want it to look like.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's just the truth of the matter when it comes to animation production and things changing. Like, as much as I do love Leonard's Map of Third Earth, and I do have it, because oddly enough, Leonard's version of the Map of Third Earth came in an action figure carrying case that had like slots for toys that didn't exist. I still haven't figured that one out, but I framed it, and his initial design for the cat slayer was like a medieval pillar with a cat head on top of it and itty bitty paws at the bottom. I'm like, that is adorable, but I'm glad that's not how it wound up.
Well, also, you have to remember too is that that map, and let me take a look at it here. I actually found the image of Lionel with the sword that Leonard came up with, and you're right. Yeah, it looks like almost like little binoculars there that he's
Yeah.
looking through. But the image of Third Earth, um, yeah, there's a story that he used to tell about that map because he created that map originally for the writers of the show, and he wanted them to use it to come up with ideas to do a story about. So, for example, one of them might do a story about, oh, the lightning obelisks surrounded by the desert of sinking sands, near the Pyramid of Mumra. That could be a good story. Or the Cave of Time, this could be a good story, and so on and so forth. And he says, and then somebody comes out and they write a story using all these things in it. And it's like, that's not what I made it for. I wanted you to do different stories based on the various things in the map. Don't write one story about all the places in the map.
You know, Leonard's designs and his character concepts still stick with me today. Like, I have yet to see a cartoon villain that is both as monstrous and threatening in demeanor and look as Mumra. And I'm talking about, like, obviously, general kids cartoons. I'm not talking about the high fantasy comics you'll see from Japan that are meant for obviously adults. But like that was a horrifying villain from the 80's that I don't think gets enough credit for the complexity of his design and how monstrous he really looks. Even compared to some of the other 80's villains, he looked like the thing of nightmares.
Oh, yes, I agree. And I'll get to that in a second, but I'm looking now at the map of the Cat's Lair, and yeah, I hadn't noticed the little pause there.
Little itty bitty paws, I love it.
All you needed was the the ball of yarn nearby.
And I can imagine him sitting there like, all right, it's a place for cats. It's got to have paws.
But with the Mumra, yes, I agree. The concept of Mumra, especially as Mumra the Ever Living, is a great concept. And he even in the interview that I did with him talks about that too, and how he came up with the term of the Ever Living, because um, he says here, Snarf, Comedy Relief, named them also the bad guys, Slife, Monkeyan, Jackalman, etc., called them mutants because it was a word that resonated with kids as bad guys. Like the Thundercats weren't mutants. One critic later wanted to know, Mumra the Immortal? No, ever living, because immortal had a benevolent sound to it. Anyway, as the overarching evil that awaited them on Third Earth, which was what remained of Earth after 2 nuclear holocausts. So lucky us, we didn't get 1 nuclear holocaust. We got 2 of them.
Two for the price of one.
Yes, and one thing I've always said that sets Leonard's stories apart from other writers is the way he treated the villains, especially when they were defeated. Because when Leonard wrote the ending of a story with the villains being defeated, it was always like, very well, Thundercats, you've beaten us this time, but we shall be back and we shall destroy you the next time. And they'd leave. And when other writers would write it, it would be like, oh no, we were defeated, run, run, oh my god, ah! And, it's like, come on now, there's no threat in these characters if they run away like scared little children when they're defeated. They need to leave with dignity and with a bit of a threat to them rather than like, we were defeated. and you can just see in some of them where they run like crazy characters when they're defeated in some stories, but not in Leonard's. In Leonard's, it was always like, all right, fine, you beat us, but we'll kick your ass the next time.
Yeah, Mumrock could never leave without getting the last word in. You may have beat me this time, but I am ever living. Like, just never let it go. He's that type of petty evil on top of being horrific, and that's what I like about the character.
Oh, yes, yes. And the fact that he hated his own reflection, it's like a lot of us can identify with that.
Right? I got a face for radio. So, what would you say was your favorite character in Thundercats?
Well, I would have liked to have seen myself some a longer story arc with Lion-O as a kid. I know that Leonard wanted to have the stories revolve around Lion-O as an adult with like a kid's attitude to things and a kid's way of thinking about things. But you know, I liked Lion-O as a kid.
I mean,
I thought he,
it would have
I
been
thought
funny. It would have been funnier to see buff 20-something-year-old Lion-O like sitting there pouting like a kid. Like, I don't want to do that. It's dumb.
yeah. But of the Thundercats themselves, I would have to say Wily Kit and Wily Cat were my favorites.
And I don't think they've been given their proper due, especially in the new iterations. Like, I think their characterization on both of those were extremely off.
Yeah, because a lot of people think that they're children because of their size. And Leonard said, no, they're not. They're adults. But they're just small sized cats.
Really, because that actually contradicts other information later in the show.
And that could be stuff that came about after Leonard was no longer involved. But earlier on, in the very early days, I remember that topic coming up about Wily Kit and Wily Cat, and I said, well, Lion-O gets older. Um, the others supposedly age a little bit. Why don't Wily Kit and Wily Cat get bigger? And he says, well, they're already grown. They're just small cats to begin with. Um, and there are different sized cats out there.
Yeah, and then you have to ask, okay, what about Linkso though? Because a lynx and a European wildcat aren't much different in size. I think that's just the fun of dealing with different writers and different interpretations of how these characters tend to be written. So,
Oh yeah, and I mean, the whole story of why the additional Thundercats characters came out in the second season.
hmm
Um, because of course they wanted more characters to make toys based on.
yep.
Um,
While the show was generally divorced from the toy line, there were times it did influence it. And it's actually something I covered in the history video this past week. Sometimes it was used because the creative decision was more interesting, having the berserkers with a more uniform look and having gimmicks that mimic powers made for interesting fight scenes and a unique look. But LJN was kind of going a little crazy at the time too. So
to me, I think other than the first four-parter that he wrote that introduced the whole concept and the characters and everything, I think the best series of stories that he wrote was the Lion-O's Anointment series.
yeah, that was really well written. But man, they dropped the ball on the animation for a few of those episodes, and I don't know why.
Yeah, and the fact that they didn't air them closer to one another, I mean, that they would have episodes in between. Um,
We still don't know
it,
why that happened. Do you have any clue why?
maybe it was just a thing with the animation wise, because I'm sure that Leonard had the scripts already around the same time. Um, but I mean, just the fact that here's Lion-O, who has to be better at all these different skills of all the other Thundercats and be able to prove himself. I mean, just that whole concept. It's a great concept.
It is. I think it's very important too.
And it's something that I'll tell you, I don't think many other writers would have come up with. In order for you to lead, you must be able to prove and show us that you can do things we can.
Yeah, and on top of that, using your brain to figure out how to overcome the shortcomings, because you're not going to beat Chitara in a straight up race. It's not going to happen.
Right.
So what do? You take the shorter but more dangerous route and you navigate those. The trial of strength for Panthro wasn't just about physical strength; it was also strength of character, because he didn't let the village below him get destroyed, and he took the load-bearing burden from Panthro because Panthro was injured. I think that was an extremely smartly written five-parter, and a lot of cartoons didn't do many five-parters. Thundercats did a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, and that's the kind of writing that Leonard does with Annie, is the well thought out, not just what you think the story is going to go, but take a different route, and things that he brings up, like you just mentioned with the anointments. It's like, it's not just a thing of strength, physical strength, but strength of character type of a thing. And those types of things come out also in Annie. And I mean, since he was writing Annie the same time he was writing Thundercats, I think you're going to have the same type of writing going on in both stories.
I think that's fair.
Because it's easier to write the way you're used to writing. Why write differently for one show and for a different show? If you are comfortable writing this way, write that way. When I write my stories, I generally try to write them the way I like to write. I don't go and try to change the whole way I write for another book series, because to me, that's not how I write. I would like to write a story about characters getting into a predicament and how they try to get out of that predicament, and tie everything all together at the end and make it look like all these loose threads that have been thrown throughout the story and all tie together at the end, that it was planned that way all along. And that's what makes for a good story, is like have no loose ends at the end of it. I mean, if you look at the TV show Lost, oh my God, that show was horribly written. They had no idea what they were doing, and it showed, because when they got to the end, it's like, how do we end this? We don't know. Make some crap up. Makes no sense.
It's like, y'all didn't think this through, did you? We didn't think we'd get this far.
Yeah. They kept throwing things like, "Oh, let's throw in this. Yeah, that's a good idea. How do we explain it away? Don't worry about it."
So I have to ask, with all this absolute wealth of knowledge and physical stuff you have, do you often get contacted by people within these specific communities asking you questions about Leonard Starr or the data you have? Or are you kind of like the ghost in the background that has all the secrets and nobody knows you exist?
The second part, yeah. I'm the ghost that nobody knows about.
That is insane. What the heck?
I mean, the only people that know about me are the ones through the Leonard Starr group. And, I don't post a lot about Thundercats in there, because the group, a large group of the people that are in there, are not Thundercats fans, unfortunately. I try to, make them aware of it and about his contribution to it, but I can tell by the number of likes that I get that it's not as popular of a theme as, like if I post a gorgeous Mary Perkins illustration from On Stage. As much as I love the look of the illustration and as much as I like the On Stage, it's still not my favorite. Yeah. It is of a lot of people in the group, and that's why I keep posting it, because it's like, okay, people love it. I'll give them what they like.
I can imagine watching that group. It's like, oh, Orphan Annie, we'll all like this. What's this cat people stuff? I don't want this cat people stuff.
Yeah, and so, and I intend to probably next week, what I might decide to do is a special week-long post of Thundercats. And if people don't like it, to hell with them.
They'll still be there by the end of the week.
Yeah, they will. I mean, look at the illustration. If you don't like it, continue to live your life. I don't care.
And I know all art is subjective. That's just the truth of how it is. But man, when Roar came out and you had people like on the opposite fence, like for some reason just adamantly defending it, getting mad when people said, "I don't like this" when it hasn't come out, but they'll defend it when it hasn't come out either, because what are values? And then their immediate response is to start dogging on the original shows. Like, look at these character designs and this artwork. This looks like garbage. I'm like, Leonard Starr worked on quite a bit. Are you stupid? Or do you just not have any taste watching these people dog some of Leonard Starr's work and other people's work and these other draftsmen? I'm like, good God, what happened to you people? You're this mad.
If if these people had to put in the amount of work that Leonard did when Thundercats was going on, I mean, this man didn't know the concept of a 40-hour work week.
No.
He was doing like 80-hour work weeks. And there were times when I tried to call him on the phone and I would barely get a few minutes with him just because he was just so tied up with so many things that he just didn't have time to talk. And I understood, it's like, you know, let me know when you have the time type of thing, just because, you know, trying to put out this TV show is just a crazy enough thing in
Yeah.
addition to a comic strip series.
They were going at breakneck speed. I mean, looking at the book, like they started looking at it at that one meeting in March, and by June of the following year, so this is March of '84, June of '85, they had done the audio recordings for all 65 episodes. Like that's it. That might be part of the course in some productions, but in the '80s for something that quick, that is absurd. Like Leonard had to be
Hmm.
working like a doggone madman. That entire staff had to be.
Oh yeah, yeah. And like I said, if you saw some of the changes in these scripts that he had them do rewrites of, that he did rewrites of, because I can see sections where things are blackened out and a new a half page of dialogue and information is put over what was there. And this goes on page after page after page of each script. And, just looking sometimes at the original script of something that was written and then the final version and say, wow, the amount of, and you think about the amount of time it actually took from them to go from the first version to the final version. It was a really fast amount of time because, like you said, they had to get these things going. It was like bang, 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 get them going, get them going. That's why he asked me if I could write a story for him, because they were just in such need of stories quickly.
Speaking of, and again, you say I wouldn't believe it, but man, if you ever want to, lay it on me. I'd be happy to read what you got. But um, during the '80s, and we're going to have to close out here in a couple minutes because we're about to go over time. But in the '80s, there was a lot of pushback from moral busybody mom groups as well as the government themselves.
Hmm.
Did Leonard Starr ever respond to any of the flatly stupid criticism that the show would get?
No, because they had the synopsis and morals book that they could go back to, and if they got any flack, they could say, just look right here. You have a problem with a certain show, you know, um,
Well,
they can say this episode illustrates the skills and talents each of us possess must be appraised honestly based on our performance,
mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. So, each show has a moral to it. Each show has a positive thing going for it. And they even will sometimes quote from the development of social cognition in such and such book of child development research. So this was, they were really well prepared to go up against any of the anti kids groups out there for the oh, we hate this show because it's not positive for the kids.
I remember reading about Peter Lawrence. He's like, I really liked writing Mumra. I kept having people accuse me of being a Satanist for it, but I really liked writing Mumra.
Oh, you can't blame him. Mumra is a fantastic character. I mean, you just gotta love him. Mumra, the ever living.
And you're never gonna get anybody to match that voice, man.
No.
Like the 2011 series tried to do like a really quiet, sort of intimidating. Like that's not Mumra. Mumra is
No.
loud, boisterous, and he is full of himself.
Yes, he's the ultimate narcissist of Third Earth. Definitely, Leonard created that character. It was like he knew what he was doing. It was like, yes, you got to have the perfect villain to go up against these people, and this is the kind of villain you need to have. One who looks a little weak and defenseless in the beginning, and then later, you know, kick your ass type of look.
I really like what he said, or rather the notes that were in the book, because again, you have the story Bible, so there's more detailed there. But he said, in the Hero Robot, it's like, here's Mum Ra. We didn't give him a backstory. He doesn't need one. And I'm like, that is so antithetical to how a lot of villains are constructed now, to where they have to have some tragic backstory or they try to redeem the villain. Mum Ra's just like, I'm literally powered by evil and I love it. I don't need no backstory. I am who I am.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what it is like with that character that I spoke of in Annie, Mr. M. He's so great and wonderful because he doesn't have a backstory. You don't know what he really is and who he is, and it's that air of mystery about him that makes him such a great character.
Correct.
Any other questions that people might have?
I had a really weird one from John, but it's kind of strange. It says, "Did Starr envision the Thunder Kittens as a married couple?" I don't. That sounds really weird because they were related. But
well, that is a good question, actually. I had somebody ask me that before, and like you say, Leonard had this way of thinking and reasoning out things, and originally the Thundercats were the sole survivors of Third Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so they needed to repopulate the whole civilization. And you really couldn't have a brother and sister repopulate, or shouldn't have in a children's show. So I can sort of have him envisioning them as not brother and sister, but, dating-wise.
Well, it's all right. We got the technology. We'll just clone everybody. Apparently, Mum Ra can do it, so anybody can do it.
Well, yes. I mean, they later went crazy and just decided, well, we'll do whatever we want. We found a couple of loose Thundercats over here, and there's a couple more over here we didn't know about.
They're hiding under the couch cushions.
Yes. It's like, well, we didn't know you existed. Well, they needed more toys. I mean, yes, we did exist.
I mean, it ultimately wound up working out because it made a little bit more sense narratively later on, especially with the recreation of Thundera and all this other stuff. But I'm never going to devalue Leonard's work. I think without him, Thundercats, number one, I don't think it ever would have been a success. And number two, it certainly wouldn't have been what it was. So I really appreciate your time. I am up to talk about this anytime you are. As you know, I try not to bug you because I know you're busy. But, like, it's kind of sad that my tiny, like, under 5,000 sub YouTube channel is the biggest one that's ever found you and said, hey, let's talk about this guy who made this awesome thing, that you're the only person who we can talk to about him. Like, the fact that not a single one of these other websites has ever found or talked to you, I just find flabbergasting. It's just frustrating to me. And I found you by complete accident.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really go out there and say, hey, look at me, I'm the guy with all the Thundercats information. No.
Well, no, but the people who care should. That's my point.
Yeah, and I think part of my whole issue of not doing that is and not promoting the fact that I have all this stuff is
you'd have people harassing you about it.
Well, no, actually, it's the fact of the feeling of defeat that I got when I tried to, go to these conventions and say, look, here's Leonard, here's these scripts, here's all this stuff of Thundercats, wouldn't you like to meet him and get this signed and do all this and that? And just meeting with such indifference. And it's like, okay, well, maybe there isn't as much interest as I think there is in the show.
How long ago was that again?
This would have been in probably the late 90s.
That's actually surprising because that was right after Toonami aired Thundercats, and it got a lot more recognition and mainstream. I think, honestly, and I don't mean this derogatory, I think you were probably just in the wrong crowd. Because I guarantee you, if you went to a RetroCon or a PowerCon or even the Comic Palooza convention here, like, you'd find a lot of love, man. I'm telling you that right now.
And it could be that it might have been the wrong crowd. Like I said, it could have just been that these were more the superhero type of fans, and that's what they were more interested in, and that's what they were there for. When you see them walking around all the time as different superheroes, um, you sort of wonder, am I in the right place?
Well,
But again,
I
where else am I going to go?
I can tell you right now that you would have gotten good reception at Comic Palooza because I did a Thundercats panel there, and we didn't have enough room for people to sit.
Uh,
They were piled out the door, and it was just a real quick rundown, like an hour panel, and like everybody loved it, and they went nuts over it.
yeah, well, like I said, with all the material that I have here, you could do several panels and do a ton of stuff just based on all the visuals and things that I have here that a lot of people have never seen before. I've even posted, which I might post this week in the group, the Thundercats newsletter stationery that they wrote all the memos and things on. And, it's got a great banner of the Thundercats logo and the Thundercats characters running out towards you
Mm-hmm.
on the top right hand side. And it's actually very early image of them because you've got the early Panthro and Jaga there.
Yep,
And
I'm familiar with it.
yeah, and so, I still have about a half a dozen unused sheets of this in my collection. Um, and, I don't think there's probably any other of this around in existence. They're probably all tossed long ago.
Yeah. And I'll get into that when we're off stream here for a minute. But we have one more question before we go from Eccentric Eulogy. She wants to know if there's any Snarf lore that people might not know about that you might know of.
Snarf. Well, like I said, there is the story, like I said, about how Leonard originally envisioned the voice of Snarf. And Snarf, again, was a character that Leonard created. And, you know, that is what upsets me the most is that all the stuff that Leonard created for the show that he's not given credit for. People know him as the head writer because that's the only credit that he got on the show. And yet, you wouldn't have Mumra, you wouldn't have Snarf, you wouldn't have all these things if Leonard hadn't written all this into the story and created all of this. Um, but I do know that he did have. I would have to say that Snarf was probably Leonard's favorite,
Yeah. He's one of my favorites too.
and so that's why he created them, and probably why he used them as much as he did. Some people probably would have created them and just had them in a cup, used them sparingly, but Leonard always tried to find a way of incorporating him in stories.
All right. Well, you are among people in a channel that like is hungry for this knowledge. So we'll talk more later. I'm going to go ahead and shut down the stream. I'll talk to you a little bit after it. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you doing this. You are a wealth of knowledge beyond what even I have, and this is a topic I've been well versed on for a while. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate your information, and my chat's been eating it up, man. So we'll go ahead and end the stream, and everybody have a good night.
Oh yes, anytime.